Hello, everyone. My name is Priyanka Sharma, and I'm a committee member on the Events and Workshop team for International Development Week. I'm also a student in the International Development Postgraduate Program here at Humber. First off, I would like to thank each and every one of you for attending today's panel discussion on the right to water. And a special thanks to all of the staff, students, and volunteers on the IDW committee who helped make everything over the course of International Development Week possible. We couldn't have done it without all of your hard work and support. Can I get a big round of applause, please? Water, a right or a commodity? The answer may seem quite simple. However, this topic has stirred up many controversial discussions. Water is still seen by many powerful groups as a resource and one that can be profited from, while simultaneously disenfranchising the most vulnerable populations on the planet. Many of us here are fortunate enough to be able to go home, turn on the tap, and have access to clean water almost instantly. However, the unfortunate reality is that 1 in 9 people every day is in need of access to clean water and sanitation. I know I can say I have taken this basic human right for granted in the past. For instance, I have unintentionally left the tap running while brushing my teeth or washing my face. After joining the International Development Week Committee, I can definitely say that I have become mindful of my actions and their long-term negative implications. Although many of us may be inadvertently responsible for these acts, the first step in addressing this issue is to raise awareness. The international community has officially declared access to and use of clean and drinkable water as a necessary pillar to upholding basic human rights. However, we must recognize that millions of people each day still struggle to access clean and safe drinking water. Today, we have 3 panelists with us who will discuss the various local and global issues surrounding water rights and what efforts need to be made in order to ensure that all future generations have the right to access clean, safe, and drinkable water. First off, we have Philip Makutsa, who some of you might have seen give an inspirational speech at the International Development Week opening ceremony last week. Philip is a regional lead for East Africa's international programs at World Vision. Philip has over 20 years of experience working with international non-governmental organizations in both development and humanitarian assistance programs. Prior to joining World Vision Canada, Philip championed the inception, establishment, and scale-up of a Center for Disease Control and World Health Organization's Safe Water Program in Kenya. This water quality intervention is one of the flagships of the WHO's water strategy. Not only has his work been featured in several publications, but he's been a guest speaker to present his work in various international conferences. Today, Philip will speak about water as a human right in a development context, drawing on field experiences and research. Our second panelist is Laurel Kozik, who is an emergency programs officer at Global Medic. Laurel joined Global Medic in May of 2014 and has responded to a number of disaster situations, including those in Pakistan, India, and the Philippines. Laurel completed her BA in Early Childhood Studies at Ryerson University and is a graduate of Humber College's International Development Project Management Program. Laurel's background in child development contributes to her keen interests in child protection, in addition to issues related to complex emergency, conflict, and displacement. Our third panelist is Kwazins Boseno, who also goes by Kwe, who is an Aboriginal Liaison Officer at Humber College's Aboriginal Resource Center. She is an Anishinaabe from the Garden River First Nations. Kwe completed a Bachelor's of Business degree specializing in public administration and human resources from Algoma University. Kwe participated in a learning exchange program in Antegua, Ecuador on sustainable economy and has a postgraduate certificate in sports and event marketing from George Brown College. Kwe interned at Right to Play in the Promoting Life Skills in Aboriginal Youth program and volunteered with Sport for Development at the Sachigo Lake First Nations. Kwe is passionate about youth and accessibility to skill-building resources. As a varsity basketball player at Algoma University for 5 years, Kwe was able to participate in annual summer camps teaching fundamental skills in that sport. It was a natural growth for Kwe to move to developing programs and providing pathways to culture at Humber College. I will now let Susan take over the stage, and I hope you enjoyed today's panel discussion on the right to water. Thank you.
Thanks very much for a great introduction. As you've already heard, we're going to be talking about water and the right to water. Today, we're looking at it from a couple of different perspectives. We're going to switch the order around a little bit from the intros. We're going to start with Laurel, move to Kwe, and then on to Philip. And we're going to look at water in a long-term development perspective, we're going to look at it from a national perspective with issues right here in Canada. And as well, we're going to look at how water is an essential part of humanitarian and disaster relief as well. Water is life. This is a statement that you'll hear again and again. You'll hear it in poetry, you'll hear it in politics, you'll hear it with reference to environmental sustainability, and even in relation to economics. As we listen to the next three speakers, I implore you to think of something a little bit more opposite. What is life without water? Because that's the issue for a lot of people around the world. As we were eating, there was some facts that came across the board that were talking about some of the serious implications of what life is like without the water that we have here. So I'm hoping our three speakers can enlighten us a bit. The format's going to be fairly simple. We're going to have each of the speakers speak for 10 to 20 minutes, whatever they're comfortable with. If you have questions, please make a note of those. At the end of all three presentations, we'll open the floor for some questions. And the event is being recorded. So if you do ask a question, please wait for the microphone to come to you so that your voice will be captured adequately. Thanks very much, and I'll start with Laurel Kozik. A graduate.
Thanks. Am I loud enough? I always feel awkward when I'm speaking in a microphone. So thank you very much for that introduction. So my name is Laurel. I work with Global Medic. Global Medic is a disaster response agency. So we work in countries affected either by complex emergencies, conflict, or natural disaster. So when we are leading a humanitarian response, access to clean drinking water is always the number one support. Should I be yelling a bit more? So access to clean water is always the number one response. Even in contexts where you would assume, access to healthcare and medical treatment and things like that would be the most important response. In reality, even if you spend the money and the time to treat a patient and you send them home and they continue to consume contaminated water, they're just going to end up right back in that hospital. So clean water is always our number one concern. So in the humanitarian context specifically, there's a lot of really unique challenges that you face in order to provide people with access to clean water. One of the most obvious ones being physical barriers. In a disaster setting, bridges are destroyed, roads are destroyed, landslides, flooding, things like that physically separate the supplies and the aid and the clean water that you have from the people that need it. So this is definitely probably one of the most obvious ones that you'd think of. In terms of mitigating this issue, it's really having flexibility in your response. There's no right way to respond to this issue. Every context is different. If the bridges are destroyed, finding a boat and accessing communities via boat. If you can't access through a boat, a helicopter. If the roads are not large enough to support a large truck with your supplies, sending in water purification units on motorcycles or on foot. So there's all different ways that you can, adapt your response. You have to stay flexible, but in a physical sense, definitely it's your logistics that you have to assess in those situations. Sort of similar to the physical barriers are communications barriers. So a lot of the time after disaster, communications are cut off. You don't have access to internet. You may not have access to telephone communication. So that's another major issue as well. Something that wouldn't necessarily be as obvious before arriving in a country where you're leading a response are the different cultural considerations and those barriers in terms of providing access to water. So in many settings, you always have to take into consideration the cultural acceptances there. So just to draw on a personal example, I worked in a country called Vanuatu, which is near the Solomon Islands, near Fiji. It's a very small island nation, a lot of very, very remote communities that don't use electricity. They don't use a lot of modern medicines and things like that. So one of the most common responses to a water disaster, which would be Aquatab, water purification tablets, very, very effective response. You take a tablet, you put it in contaminated water, you give it 30 minutes, and the water's safe to drink. Very effective response. In this specific setting, it just was not accepted by the communities. For one, they didn't like the taste. It leaves a very faint taste to the water that they didn't like. But beyond disliking it, they didn't trust it, and that was the main issue there. So in that setting, even if you have hundreds of thousands of aqua tablets that could solve the water issue and could provide access to clean water, even if you physically deliver those tablets to the communities, you're not truly delivering the response that you're intending to deliver because it's not being accepted by those communities. So things like that, you have to be very mindful of. Working closely with local community groups and local communities themselves is really important, because a lot of those things you wouldn't be aware of that before you're there on the ground and planning your response. So it's definitely a key issue to take into consideration. Another major issue in terms of working in complex emergencies and disaster emergencies are the political barriers that you face. So a lot of the times it is possible to face resistance or even a complete blockade in terms of accessing the people that you want to access. So as an example from my personal recent experience working in eastern Ukraine, where there's a very, very significant conflict situation. There are very significant lines drawn in terms of where you can access and where you cannot access. And on a daily basis, leading distributions, you would face blockades. Checkpoints that were open the day before, now they weren't open. Or they were open to certain people, but as a Canadian citizen, they weren't open to me. And things like that you really have to mitigate in order to get clean water to the people that need it the most. One of the biggest things we had to do in that context, again, was working through local agencies, working through local Ukrainian national staff, because they had access to places that I personally did not have access to. So it's just about, assessing the situation and finding a way to get your response to the people that need it through a trusted channel. And again, varies from context to context. A different political barrier that you might face, it's not actually feeling a sense of resistance or a blockade. You might feel a tremendous amount of support from local authorities or local groups in terms of supporting your response. Working with the local government can be hugely helpful. They're extremely well connected. They have, immense local knowledge. They know the areas that need to be targeted. They have the connections to get there. If you're having issues importing your supplies through customs, one of the biggest things that you'd face, they can snap their fingers and no problem, we'll help you out, we'll make sure that we get, your supplies in the country without delay. Of course, those are all truly helpful in terms of, cutting down your response time. But what are the political interests of those groups? What is their religion? Things like that you have to be wary of. Even it might not be a political interest of the entire entity, but that particular person that you're communicating with, what are their political interests in terms of, who they would want to support. So in this situation, it's not necessarily that you're feeling resistance, but you might be, feeling support, but they might be trying to direct the support in very specific directions. So obviously, as a humanitarian agency, it's your mandate to be neutral. It's your mandate, to serve people based on greatest need, not based on their religious beliefs or their political interests and things like that. But in order to do that, you do need a very clear understanding, a very thorough understanding of the specific history, of the specific context of where you're working, to know, some of these tensions that might be in place. So you do have to be very aware of that. So a specific example, again, from my experience working in Myanmar recently, very complicated country to operate, a lot of political reform over recent years. We were very nervous going into the response in terms of getting the supplies, just from a logistics standpoint, getting the supplies through customs without delay and getting to the people that needed it. And we definitely knew that we were going to need some support locally in order to make that happen without facing any delays. What we had done was enlist support from the embassy here in Canada to ensure that we had local contacts in country to support that process, but more importantly to ensure that once that support was given, that the control of the supplies still remained with our agency. A lot of the time, you'll receive that support, but it's sort of, we helped you out and, you can hand the supplies to us and we'll take care of it. In Nepal, it's probably one of the best examples that we can give in terms of those kinds of challenges. When the Nepal earthquake hit last year, the government all of a sudden was flooded, the country was flooded with foreign armies, foreign agencies, a lot of funding, a lot of supplies were pouring in. And the local government really struggled with feeling a sense of control in terms of the response. They were very concerned with, having control in terms of what was going to happen. And So, in certain ways that would manifest themselves, the local government wanted to lead all of the assessments. So they essentially had asked local agencies, stop your assessments, we're going to lead the assessments, and then from there we can plan a response, which again, as an agency can be, it can feel like not the most efficient way to go about things. Similarly, when supplies were being imported, the local government was very interested in taking control of those supplies. You can hand those supplies to us, we know the situation on the ground, we know where it needs to go, and we'll make sure it gets there. So again, our mandate as an agency is to ensure that we can deliver the supplies ourselves to the people that need it. So on one hand, when you look at that situation, on one hand, of course, it would be extremely valid. The local knowledge, the local connections, they understand the situation there the best. So to hand, the supplies over could seem like a good idea. On the other end of that, what are their specific interests? You look into issues such as greed and corruption, especially when you're talking about a country like Nepal, where, on the opposite end of the spectrum, it could be a very unwise decision. So again, I'm sure the word coordination you've heard time and time again in your courses, but in the humanitarian context, certainly coordination with different agencies and maintaining the control of your supplies is one of the most important things. Anyways, thank you for letting me blab on. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. I'm sure that there may be some more questions if there's anything more specific that you wanted me to get into. Feel free to ask away, but thank you very much for your time.
So Quay, over to you.
I'm gonna step up to the podium if that's okay.
Sure. Should I move out of the way? Am I going to be in the middle of this PowerPoint?
Feel free to slide sideways.
Just stay here.
Thanks. All right, welcome. I'd like to welcome our guests who are here to Humber College. My name is Quizance Busnow, and I'm the Aboriginal Liaison Officer here at the college. I'd just like to take this time to introduce myself traditionally in my language. So it's Quizance Nadishnakaz Gidiganzi Bidon Jaba Makwadodem, and that translates into they call me Quizance. So in Ojibwe, it's kind of different where we don't have a name, it's like what we're called. And then I'm from Garden River First Nation. So does anyone know where Sault Ste. Marie is? Yeah, I'm from there. We're a pretty urban community. I'm from the Bear Clan. And I'm going to talk to you about water crisis in First Nation communities. So for over the past 30 years, communities have been dealing with water issues. It's not anything new for our communities in Canada. As of November 30th, 2015, there were over 135 drinking water advisories in effect in 92 First Nation communities across Canada, excluding British Columbia. 2/3 of all First Nation communities in Ontario have been under at least one drinking water advisory at some time in the last decade. Also, something to note, in Ontario, we do have the lowest water advisories, but that's because they don't count small water systems. So any First Nation community is tied to a small water system. So we're not being counted. That's how Ontario has the lowest water advisories. So what is a drinking water advisory? They're preventative measures put in place to protect public health from drinking water that could be contaminated. There are 3 types. The boil water advisory, so you could drink it, but you just have to boil it first. Do not consume, and then do not use, so you can't touch it at all. For Ontario communities, this may come as a recent development to people, but it's been an ongoing issue for First Nation that communities face, and it's not just a Northern Ontario issue either. Communities like Cape Croker First Nation, which is by Wyerton, they had a non-drinking water boil do not consume advisory this past summer. If we look at Ontario's list of drinking water advisories from Health Canada, its initial listings began in 1997. Numerous First Nations have been listed more than once. The latest one is Kashechewan First Nation. This is just Ontario. If you want to go online after, you can look at Health Canada, and it lists all of the provinces. So if we use AANDC's risk level evaluation guidelines, the following was found for 120 First Nations in Ontario and 158 water systems inspected. 72 categorized as high overall risk, 61 was medium overall risk, and 25 were low. So each water system posed risk. So water issues. Taking care of the water is a mutual responsibility. We are all global citizens, and everyone has the right to clean water free of contamination. For example, even though this is in the United States, Flint, Michigan are working together. The Little Band River of Ottawa Indians in Manistee, Michigan donated $10,000 to relief funds. And a Muslim organization donated 30,000 bottles of water to the Red Cross in Flint. So everyone is taking part and mutual responsibility to fix this issue. For water crisis in First Nations, extensive work is being done to raise awareness and create change. A lady by the name of Josephine Mandamin is a Mother Earth water walker, and she has walked over 20,000 kilometers to raise awareness, and it's been an annual walk since 2003. This summer, the water walk came by Humber College, and 3 of our students were able to participate in the walk. So anyone can participate, and how you participate is you walk 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers, and it goes all the way, this year it went all the way from Quebec to Madeline Island in Wisconsin. So Josephine is known as a grandmother water walker. She says, as women, we are carriers of water. We carry life for the people, so when we are carrying that water, we are telling people that we will go lengths for the water, we'll probably even give our lives for the water if we have to. And I'm just gonna play a clip on her because she's doing a really good job raising awareness for the conditions in First Nation communities.
When we walk with the water, we are very we pray for the water that we're carrying. We pray for it. We pray to it. We speak to it. Our minds and our hearts are with the water that we carry to field, because our water is very precious, and we've adopted it. We picked it up from where we walk from. We're carrying it from one place to another. We talk about how we as women, we raise awareness about how important the water is. And I say we, I talk about women in general, and especially the water walkers who have walked with me. There have been a lot of supporters who all over Turtle Island. I guess that everybody seems to be a water walker now, because they've either participated somehow in water walk. And so when I say we, I think about them. And our First Nations are the Ojibways, the Odawas, and Potawatomis with Three Fires Society that I belong to. It's my Indian name is Bidaski, which means one who comes with the light. And my clan is the Fish Clan. Wansisi is the name of the fish that are my clans. So when I talk about how we as Nishnawbe people, we have to carry our sovereignty, our work as we have been governed by the Creator, that we are when we're brought down by the spirit world, down to the physical world. We're given responsibilities, roles that we have to do. We have to take care of our mother the earth, and that's what we're doing now. Is taking care of our mother the earth. We have to, especially now in this day and age, where she's really suffering. She's being polluted, she's being prostituted, she's being sold, she's all these things that are happening to her. It's happening to us women now. And so when I think about how we as women have to start picking up our bundles, we have to really think about how important it is that we have to really know who we are as women, that we're very powerful women. We can be very, very instrumental in how things are changing. When the white man came to the Americas, he saw the beauty of the earth, how we took care of it, how we nourished everything. They thought that there was no, they didn't think us humans. We had our own laws, we had our own sovereignty, we had our own nations. And our sovereignty is taken away by the white society because we cannot do what we're supposed to be doing. The treaties have been broken. There were so many treaties that were made, and they broke them. The white man broke all the treaties that they made with the Anishinaabe people. We cannot rely on the white people to tell us what to do. We have to start doing our work that we have been governed by Creator to do these things. So we have to start doing our work in terms of how we as Anishinaabe people have to live the way we used to live. We have to take care of the animals. We have to take care of Mother Earth. We have to take care of our sovereign duties, which is to take care of everything that is there. And for people to understand that's the thing that we have to look at the four colors of man, to work together in order to be of one mind, one heart, one mind. That's what we're trying to in this walk, because we're all water. We're all 70% or 8% of water that in our bodies, and that are everything that we see is made of water. So we're all connected with water. We're all united with water.
All right. So before I end my presentation, I just wanted to say that water and protecting water as a human right is a mutual responsibility. Everyone has an equal part in taking care of water and being responsible to each other. Recently, with the Flint, Michigan incident, Snoop Dogg was asked why, if you have no connections to Flint, why donate or contribute? And he said, because we all have ties, we're all humans, or we're all people. So remember that we are all humans, and this is our right together, and we all have ties together. Thank you, miigwech.
I just love that we ended a presentation with a quote from Snoop Dogg. It's awesome. It was like the best quote I've heard all week. Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic over to Philip, and he has a PowerPoint presentation as well. So if you'd like to stand up here, it's easier. Can you see anything? Yeah. Okay. This poor camera can't see you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you thought I was reading my script, eh? So how are we doing? Good. Yeah, wasn't that beautiful just to hear something from the First Nation? I really have a soft spot for Grandma Josephine. Now I'll be telling my kids about Grandma Josephine. Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much. And thank you again, the faculty staff, for having me back again. And this is great. So I'm going to take a different spin, given that I was here on Tuesday. How many of you were here on Tuesday? A good number of you. Okay. Yeah, so I spoke a lot on World Vision. Been along, it's a development agency that we engage with communities for over 15 years. And I mentioned that our WASH programs we have in 55 countries. And we have a big budget of about 113 million. And just today, I came with some copies for you, our annual impact report for 2015. And so I'll leave this with Jennifer. This should just serve as a resource for you guys, just to make a connection with the realities out there overseas. What's really going on? What are the kind of challenges we are going through? And one of the things which we're reporting here is that 30.6% of our budget went towards health, water, and sanitation. So it just shows how we're responding to the issue of water. And so I just love that the theme we have for this afternoon, and that is the right to water. I might be touching on something which maybe you might have learned in your course, but what I would like to take this opportunity to stretch our minds, to think outside the box. I'll be using World Vision as a backdrop, but then most of the sharing might be basically looking at the global issue per se, so that we can understand what are really the issues that are making people, talk. What are people talking about when different practitioners come together? What are the issues that they table? What do they bring to the table? So I'd like to start off by that quote, and that's from Pope Francis. And when I was looking at that, I was saying, now, if Pope Francis is able to affirm that, is there room for debate then on whether water is a resource or a right? Pope Francis, the one who's closer to the guy upstairs. So I thought that was very neat that he would actually contribute and make a voice towards water rights. And so I thought that was very beautiful. And then again, we have had, I think it was Susan had mentioned earlier about the human rights being something that has been endorsed by the UN. And every key world leader is rallying behind that. And so I think that's the basic thing which we all agree. Now, just to unpack, I thought it might be nice for us just to unpack, like every time we talk about water rights or right to water, sometimes we confine ourselves just to accessibility. But when I look at what we have there, I see there are kind of a number of checklists that we may need to have, especially for us in development, program. Because many times we just think of access, but I think there's more than access. Sometimes the issue of quality, we forget about it. Issue of continuality, sustainability. Are they continuing to have access to the outcome of the benefit of the water? Affordability, and most important, community assets, school and health facilities, as well as gender issues. These are the big issues whenever we talk about water quality, access to water, in terms of rights. I like the way it was put. Someone just, Fred just took this and said, okay, let's give it, we know we are very visual, so let's put it in a way that we can even understand it better. And again, it's just the same thing, talking about sufficiency, acceptability. I like what my earlier speaker talked about, cultural acceptability. The whole issue of about affordability, so again, the same thing comes back again. Now, why right to water? Why this discussion? Now, when you look at the Millennium Development Goals and you look at their scorecard, it's a kind of impressive. I think it's only water that met the Millennium Development Goal. It was more than half. Sanitation was still below. But still, we have this segment of our world population still not having access to clean water, and 2.5 billion not having access to adequate sanitation. And so I thought this was the right theme and the best time for us to discuss, and basically looking what are the global issues that are underlining, especially for us as students, who are those who are, have interest in development. What does this mean to us? So I'm going to walk you through some of the global debates. Some of the things may make you think twice. Some of the things maybe you might have taken for granted over the years, maybe even in your classes, but I hope it will help you desire and kind of inspire you to become more of a researcher and a practitioner in water development. Now, one thing that has been said over the years is that all the big issue that we are grumbling with is about scarcity. Lack of enough water, lack of access to safe water. For a long time, I kind of agreed with that. I mean, we go to a community's world vision because they don't have access. Water is scarce. And they cannot, and if the water that's there, they cannot access because it's groundwater. So they need some facilities, they need some resources to access that groundwater. But then within this, there are two aspects, economic scarcity, and we are talking about getting reliable source of water, sometimes can be very expensive. We are talking about physical scarcity, I think someone mentioned about it, which is a bigger problem than what you can, more than what is more than what we may want to think about. Now, again, on that same school of thought, United Nations also, when they were looking about the rights to water, they came again about the issue. They said, the problem we're having is addressing insufficient water supply to satisfy the basic human needs. So that's what the United Nations is also looking at. But let's now flip that and look at what are the global world leaders and water experts talking about when it comes to issue of scarcity. Is this really the problem? Is this really the issue that's limiting and making us not see the right to water being fulfilled? So I'd like to invite you on a journey which is going to help us explore a few other thoughts concerning that are coming out. I grabbed some thoughts from the Second World Water Forum, which occurred in March 2000. And I thought some of the points that came up in those discussions were very interesting, and it still speaks to us as a development agency. I've been in development and relief program for over 20 years, and the same thing that were articulated then are still appearing. And that's what I want us to look at briefly. So the first thought is about that what is not a commodity, it's a human right. And again, that basically means that it's not something that for few to have access and explore, to make profit out of it. So this is the way the excitement starts. When we talk about right to water, it's all to do with water management. Many times we have been putting the blame on the scarcity, but it's more than that. And so it's something for us to think about even as we move forward. I've worked in different countries, and I've seen that they've been having some water system, but after a while, they're not working. I've been to Burundi, where they have a nice, beautiful land. The rains are heavy. But then when you look at the settlement that has encroached the water catchment area, all that catchment area has been destroyed. Environmental degradation. So it's all to do with management. How are you managing the water management? The other piece, which is of interest for me, is the new call for water ethic. That they say that water management is not a problem. That what is a management problem is also a cultural problem, rather than a resource problem. So many times we forget, and I think my earlier speakers might have touched about this, and especially in the First Nation, that there's more to water than just being a resource. And these are some of the things which are kind of impeding some of this access to water as we engage with the communities. Now, there's this thought which I don't know what you think about, but I found it very interesting. And this is where I look back in Kenya, my experience in Kenya. This thought where that said that the government should participate in people's project rather than the people participating in government's project. There came a time in Kenya, I think about 15 years ago, where the government said that we are going to turn all the water points to the community so that the community will manage them. But then the question was, how can you hand over water projects to the community that are not functioning? So we put a pressure to them and say that you have to do rehabilitate those water facilities and then hand over to the community. And so there's been this kind of shift of thinking of saying, okay, how about you come to the community and work with them, let them participate and be part of the designing of that water program, and then let them own it. And then that's how it will work. The other piece of argument that was also floated was about the water culture, which also includes gender. And I think lots of stuff can be said about how women have been burdened. They carry most of the burden when it comes to water-related issues. There's a lot that can be said about the girl child when it comes to education, when it comes to other opportunities that they're being denied. So all these are the things which are the issues that are often sometimes put on the kind of not put at the center of discussion. And so when you're talking about global issues around water rights, these are some of the things as we move along we need to bear in mind. So as World Vision, these are the things we always address in our water programming. Gender issues are being factored in when it comes to the community water users association. When it comes to water management committees, we always look at the issue of gender issues in that area. Now, another big issue that came in development, again, as I said, been in development for quite a while, was this issue of privatizing water points. What happened? People were looking at the systems. Donors were questioning. We are putting a lot of resources into the country. We're injecting a lot of funding. But what happens after some time? I think your guess is as good as mine. When you talk about the central system for treatment, what happens after a while? You find people are getting water that is raw from sewage, not treated, but they're being paid. So those are the kind of things which we were talking about. So the thought came about, how about we privatize so that it's for profit making and people will be serious and committed. And so this is one of the issues that we have been working with as World Vision, looking for, though we work with the private sectors and the government, but we are very, very cautious that we don't want to marginalize the community because we make things to be not affordable. Because of time, I may not touch a lot. The last two is about, I think you might be familiar. Have you guys heard of eco-sanitation? Ecological sanitation? This is something which we need to learn even in our classes because this is where the in thing we are doing, especially when you're talking about water tables that are very, very, very low, and you cannot put any latrines and all that. So eco-sanitation, normally actually we talk about ecological sanitation. It talks about turning waste into resource. And this is basically what they call closing the loop of food security. And so it might be something of interest for us maybe as a class, one time just to go through that. There's a very beautiful science about that. And I think it will help us to know and see how can we help to ensure that we have this access to the right water. So so I just want to end up by suggesting a few thoughts which I was thinking about as terms of efforts that may be needed to ensure that our future generation have a right to access clean, safe, and drinkable water. The first one I was thinking about was the political space for charities and not-for-profit organizations that are already working in the water sector. As you might be aware, right now, as World Vision, one of the biggest challenges we are having is even raising our funds. Our funds, when I look at the time I joined World Vision, it was more than 10 years. We had we had a good chunk of funding where we could go anywhere we wanted, but right now it's quite limited. And we also realized that our charity space is reducing. And yet there's a lot of good work being done, and there's a need out there for water. And I thought this could be something for us as we think about what can we do about this to ensure that that political space is kind of safeguarded. The other one is also about policy, water policies and government investments in water projects. We have not been seeing a lot of that, especially like in Canada. Again, on Tuesday I mentioned about this, that the government priority is not so much in, water doesn't feature there. It doesn't feature on their overseas development assistance program. It's not there. And so if there would be a way of influencing, like as we meet our new member of parliament, I'm told 199 MPs that we have in Ottawa right now are very new. We are seeing as World Vision, that's an opportunity for us to influence their thinking, their thoughts, to think about the need out there of water. I like the statement, someone looked at it and said that for every $1 invested in clean water, the returns are beautiful. So impressive, $4 to $12 in economic returns. Think of water impacting every other sector. And as I mentioned last Tuesday, that if there's no progress in water, that Millennium Target Goal for water, then all the other Sustainable Development Goals targets will never be achieved. And then lastly, which is more practical, I think maybe for you guys here, is taking seriously this World Water Day as an opportunity for us to create or to raise public awareness on the importance of water. It's only when you raise that awareness that people will be willing to support and contribute and participate in the journey that we are in. So I just hope that these are some of the thoughts I thought I could just share with you briefly, just to stir you up and think globally and think in terms of the big picture. What are the big issues? Once you graduate, you'll go out and get involved in some of these big debates. And you'll be asked, okay, you have a program we need to design. But you'll be designing within a context of political realms, the context of social issues, and also economic factors. And so how do you navigate yourself through that? And so I think that'd be something that may be of interest, even as we go down the road. So I'm looking forward to our discussions, and I think this is just a good segue for us now to get into some panel some discussions, and just to hear some of your thoughts. What's in your mind? What are you guys thinking about? What are you beginning to figure out? And what other things would you be of interest to you? So once again, thank you very much for having me around, and thank you for listening. God bless.
So as you all are finishing up your food and thinking about the really insightful question, I have a couple of questions for the panel that came up that I'd like to ask. First off, and I've given you them ahead of time, so it's no tricks. In relation to either a domestic issue with First Nations or with the communities that you represent, so a humanitarian community or a development context, do you see, really since the UN has put out this big push on water, do you see any improvements in the overall water situation in remote communities? How does water access and acceptability affect also the economic development of a community? So whoever wants to jump in first. I will volunteer you if you don't volunteer yourself, so I'm used to that.
Yeah.
I can answer that a little bit. I think that with it being like more in the news more, I think that our Canadian government has acknowledged what First Nation communities have been saying for 30 years.
That's nice. That's nice to hear positive in this field. Philip.
Yeah, my response to that would be that most governments are now taking up the challenge. They have realized the importance of water when they look at other sectors. They also know that they are being measured also in terms of their contribution to what we had MDG as well as to SDG. So they are now kind of looking at their budgets as a national budget and seeing what portion needs to be done and how can they increase those budgets to those services. So I think with this push, it's giving us, even the development agencies within those countries, opportunity even to invite the government line ministry to the table and other water players to discuss an issue. So it has become, so I see that this push by the UN and the endorsement by the UN is giving an opportunity for other development agencies in the water sector to rally behind a good cause. And they have reasons even to spend some money in doing some research and development in those areas.
Fantastic. More good news.
Yeah, I think political will probably would be one of the biggest issues. The solutions are there. The solutions are out there. Clean water is a very simple concept that can be achieved. The funding exists in reality. It's just a matter of directing it to where it needs to be.
Great. Do we have any questions from the peanut gallery? Because my class knows I always have questions if they don't.
I have a question, although I'm not a paying customer.
Wait for the microphone, please, John. Missed the instructions.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the presentations. Hello, Laurel. Nice to see you again. So the title of the session was resource or a right. That's correct? So that begs the question: is it actually a human right? Which is contrary to, I think, what we've been told. It's not a settled question. It's settled in the kind of moral sense. So there was a vote at the UN, yes, but it's not. It's actually not a legal right yet, right? It hasn't been implemented in the not clearly articulated within the human rights instruments. And as we know, some of the major holders of fresh water, including Canada, the United States, New Zealand, Australia, all abstained in the vote at the UN. So didn't actually vote for, and this has been a very contentious issue at the UN. When I used to work there, right around the time that this resolution was being drafted, the right to water is a hugely contentious issue. As is the right to health, as you would know. So I think the issue's not settled legally yet. Hopefully it will be. There's a process at the Human Rights Council going on. But my question is really, what difference does it make? So if World Vision, the First Nations communities, and Global Medic, I mean, if you treat it as a settled question, water is a human right, how has that changed your programming, I guess? If it has, or your approach to advocating for it as a right, or defending it as a right, promoting it as a right, yeah.
Maybe
Go ahead, jump in, Philip.
Let me take a shot. Did you say it's called John?
John, yes.
Hey, John, thank you.
John is faculty here. He's used to asking hard questions.
It's my job to problematize things.
No, John, thank you. You are spot on, John. You are spot on what you have said. And I think for us, the challenge comes from the fact that we still have 780 million people who do not have access to water. Now, when you look at the number of children who are dying, who don't even see their 5th birthday, I mean, how right is it for us to be around on this earth when someone cannot even see their 5th birthday? So I think it just comes from that moral element of humanity. And you're right, it does not be legalized. I mean, I look at that legislation. Some of the water acts we have in the countries and overseas, they are yet to be updated or they are yet to be addressed. So some of those issues which you are saying doesn't really put certain players to accountability. But that said, I think if we are going to make sure that everyone has access to water, and water is life, and water changes everything, then I think we have the moral obligation to step up to that challenge and to that need. Whether it's a right or not, but we have people, and that's why like now, so coming back to the second part of your question, for World Vision, what we did, World Vision came up with what we are calling child well-being targets. And and there were 4 of them, and one of them was simply looking at preventing a number of children who are prevented from diseases and infectious diseases, infection and diseases, and water is one of them. Now, that's the promise we give to the donors, that through this intervention with health and other aspects, we are going to ensure that the children in the developing countries will be able to survive and even thrive within their communities. So with World Vision, it has changed our strategy. So we have a regional strategy, we have national strategies that has found its way in. And so basically that's what's happening. And then within that also is how we are allocating our investments. They're being directed towards that so that they can address that issue straight away. So reason being is that we are giving donors promise that we are out there to make a difference. So it's be it education, health, but more so we are saying in health, what does it look like? So that's where it comes in. So that basically, John, coming back to what you've just asked, it has actually changed the way we are doing our business, our engagement with the community, and even revisiting some of the promises we had given to the donors and community. We are now looking at them, are we really delivering on that? And if so, what are the benchmarks? And so that's where we are coming to. Thank you so much, John. That's a good question.
Would either of you like to chime in?
Sure. In my perspective of this, from my point of view, I think, yeah, it's a right, but it's not settled. Like, it's not. For example, like how it affects and how I would go forward in programming if I, like, aside from at Humber and for my own community, contaminated water has bacteria that can create rashes in young children. And for some communities, when children get rashes, children's AIDS comes in, and then the parents are deemed unfit, when in reality, the water is what has the bacteria, and how can you clean this child if they have unsafe water all the time? In the Skandiga First Nation, for the past 20 years, they haven't had water that they can use. So how can we expect parents to be able to not have their children with rashes when they don't even have water they can use? And then I think it's not settled because as long as Josephine Mandaman has to walk to raise awareness and has to create like a social media following, and there has to be those hashtags like change for water, it's not settled. As long as she's walking and along the Great Lakes and gaining momentum, it's not settled. That's my perspective.
Sure, yeah. In terms of how it has affected Global Medic, it is our mandate to provide clean water. It's our absolute number one concern. So for us, it has always remained a constant. In terms of, changing the legal background regarding water, I think it would just support the response in terms of putting more pressure on other actors that are involved, putting, a political obligation or just an obligation to the local communities and the local governments in order to support the response.
I know I'm not supposed to answer because I'm on the panel, but I have to answer. Because I can't help myself. I really think it's an interesting point that John brought up, and I think the difference, if it was law that water was a right, would be the requirement of domestic governments to put funding behind it. Obviously, governments have to have money. So in Canada, education's a right, and even in the most remote communities, there's a school. But water's not a legal right, and that's why we have remote communities that don't have water. So I think once it's legalized, there's an actual legal requirement of domestic governments to do something about it, and they would have to. So that's my take. Now, when you talk about countries that don't have the funding to be able to provide basic services, I think that's a further down the road solution, but maybe domestically, that would be a great solution. But I know we didn't even bother to vote, so. Next question, anybody?
so thank you everyone for sharing. I actually have two questions. So the first question was for Philip. I was wondering, with the programs that World Vision offers, you had mentioned back on Tuesday that there were 3 C's, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Christianity,
Yeah.
was that one of them?
Yeah, that's the Christian. Okay, so it's Christianity. Okay, we are Christian, we are child-focused, and we are community-based.
Yes. So with that being said, does that impact the communities that you go into to help with water-based issues or any other issues? Does the programming get affected by what the predominant faith in the community is?
No, in fact, we go beyond race, creed, and religion.
Okay.
We even work in Mauritania, which is a Muslim country. We have programs in different parts of the world where we work in our programs are in Muslim majority communities. So doesn't really limit us. As I mentioned earlier, that Christian identity is simply a model that we follow of Jesus, how he had compassion. He was moved by compassion to touch the poor, to meet the needs of those who are most vulnerable.
Thank you. And Quay, I had a question for you. So you had mentioned that a lot of the Ontario Indigenous communities have individual water supply sources or personal ones? I wasn't sure. I wasn't. Yeah.
No, that's a good question. So to clarify that, the First Nation communities are tied to small water systems. So like any small community other than like a metropolitan city would be classified as a small water system. So Ontario only reports on their large water system, so that leaves out all the ones that First Nation communities are a part of.
So then if that's the case, how do we, what's the next step? Do we, are we supposed to get the Ontario government, or the government, to commit more to including those systems in research gathering, or should we be focusing, like how, you know? Because it's like, you hear about this, about Indigenous communities not having access to clean water, but what next? Like, what can we do?
What can you do in terms of as a student?
Yeah, like as people in this program.
I think that what you can do definitely, and I will reference this again, but is maybe check out the Sacred Water Walk, and that's a great way to get involved. Josephine Madamich has been doing this since 2003, and I think with social media, like gaining awareness, and I feel like already the reports that were done through AANDC have already been the effects of that social media pressure, I think.
Thank you.
Any others? Okay, I have another question.
Shall we ask your students some questions too?
Sure. Go ahead, ask them a question. It's a school, right?
Yeah, I'm just curious to know how many of you have been following some of the global debates on water? And if so, which debate which was your maybe one thing that's just stood out for you and said, wow, I mean, this is what people are talking about? Anybody? Yes, please.
I guess this isn't really a debate, but we've been doing the sphere standards in our humanitarian assistance class. Oh, Mike's still here. But I was surprised at the amount of water that people need every day. I think even it says it here, between 50 and 100 liters of water per person per day. And I was like, that's a lot. And then just started thinking about the amount of water that I use in my day-to-day life.
So you guys are in Mike White's class?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah,
that's
he
why
had
you
to
get-
take a conference call. He just took off,
Okay.
but they have him at 3:20.
Yeah. No, that's it's good to think about, talk about 50 to 100, liters. And the sphere also talks about that in a refugee setting, they need actually 15 liters of water for drinking to survive. And if any agency or the government or UNHCR cannot provide, then they have to answer a few questions. Yeah, but that's good. That's good. Maybe just one more. Thank you very much. I appreciate the sphere standards are very good. I'm trying to see who I should recruit to join World Vision. So if you answer me.
Okay. Put your hand up.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is not an answer, this is a question. Okay, so this is perhaps a little bit more for Laurel and World Vision, just in regards to how you decide what's adequate water, what's an adequate water source. I know one of the first things when you go in and response, and I think that our opening ceremony was really enlightening, and how your representative from Global Medic came in and he was talking about how that's the first thing you do. So when you go in and you're trying to decide, like, what kind of technology do you use? How has that changed in the past couple of years as well? Because I know there's been a lot of changes to how we decide how water is clean or not. And how does World Vision do in watch programs? Like, how do you decide in the community? How do you assess the water? And what kind of methodology do you use to clean the water? You know, you talked about eco-sanitation before. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that? I think it'd be really interesting first, before we talk about how to provide people water, is how we assess the water so that we know what the problem is. And I think that's my question. Okay.
And your name is?
Liz.
I just want to know the class too. So, okay, no, that's a very good question. Looks like you're ready to go to the field, eh? Okay, with World Vision, whenever we work with the community, we do what you call a geological survey, and that's using a thermometer, and that's able to tell us where there's a water potential. And then normally they decide on 3 spots, and the community has to choose one of those spots. So that's why they're given a decision. Many times you say that the women should be part of that selection or the siting of the well, because they know where the well should be for their own convenience. Now, the minute we strike the water, the first thing is to do is to test the water. We look at the chemical properties as well as the bacteriological quality of the water. And that's done in our government chemistry, because water is a public health issue. It has to be done by a certified public health institution. So most cases we take to the government. Now, upon being approved is when we continue with now the development of that water point. And so that's why we bring in what we are calling the low technology water pump every day from maybe Mach 2, depending how deep the water is, the borehole is. And so that's what you use. So in terms of technological choice, it depends on the terrain or geological structure. In Rwanda, we are more into spring protection because of the artesian system is such that water is just is so much at the surface level. So we do a lot of spring protection. In Tanzania, we are more into boreholes, because most of the water that where the terrain, the structure is, the aquifer is very, very, very low. So that's how what it determines. And now there are other places we find that you cannot access and exploit the groundwater because the groundwater is saline. So in that case, what happens, we go for rain harvesting. So that's again what changes. And then there are other places where you find that they only have access to surface water. So then we bring in point of use water treatment, and this is where coordination comes in. I think if you are here in the morning, you might have met Bowery, World Water Ambassadors. So they have introduced what they're calling coordination, treating the water at the point of use. So most cases, that's what's done. But now in big water scheme, like gravity scheme, there's a water treatment, centralized water treatment where they use the chlorine. And so normally they have to look at what you're saying, creating and leaving a 2% sodium hypochlorite solution as a residue so that they can make sure that the water is safe. So basically the technology choice depends on the country, the terrain, and geological structures. So that's what determines. So that has answered your question.
Just to touch on that from the humanitarian side of it, certainly, formal chemical testing to test the quality of the water is important in the humanitarian context. In that emergency setting where you're trying to get access to clean water within a few hours, you don't always have time to run a formal test. A lot of the times it's working and speaking directly with the community members that you're working to serve, because they can tell you exactly how many children have gotten sick, exactly how many illnesses have been reported, things like that. So, that's sort of the most important way that you can identify what areas are in need, where do we need to be intervening. In terms of the actual responses that you use, it's going to depend, as Philip was saying, a lot on the situation of the specific area where you're working. So if it's there's one main community source and a high population of people that use that source, that's the source that you're going to target, where you would install, as Philip said, a point of source system. Especially if people are coming to the source and collecting water with buckets and things like that, that might have been, what's the word? Contaminated, yeah, or exposed to contamination, thank you. Then those point of source responses will always include some kind of a chlorine additive, because if you're distributing pure, clean water into a dirty bucket, families are taking that home and they're still consuming contaminated water. If it's a more rural setting, to target one specific source is not necessarily the most effective response, because there's not a huge number of people that are using any particular source. So in those settings, you want to target the household level. So providing some sort of water purification solution that families can use in their homes. Another part that comes into play in the humanitarian setting is there's the emergency response, hooking up water purification equipment, much like the one that we've got set up in the back of the room there, that's going to provide access to water immediately as soon as you're on the ground. And then sort of the recovery phase, where you might provide a system that'll last for 3 months, 6 months, or a year, which gives the communities enough time to allow their water sources to return to normal, to return to the drinkable state that they were before the disaster. So.
Maybe just to add one more thing. In a relief setting, what we used to have with when I used to work in Dadaab in Kenya, we used to have a monthly jerrycan cleaning, because they used to store the water in the jerrycans, and within time there'd be a biofilm forming inside, and that of course not make the water to be safe. So we had these campaigns on monthly basis where we used to call jerrycan cleaning, and they would be given ballast, small rocks, which they would use to really get out all the biofilm, and so that the water that they would be collecting normally is coordinated, but the storage was the issue. So that was one thing that we used to do. And in the long-term development, normally the government insists that every 6 months the water quality must be tested. So that's again is a Water Act in most of the countries where we work in. So every 6 months they have to go and get a report and satisfy, and that's just part of the Public Health Act, that the water must be tested every 6 months to make sure that it's safe. Yeah.
Another question.
My question is mostly for Philip and Laurel, but Quay, you could probably jump in too. How do you find that climate change is affecting the communities in which you're working in? Do you find that your agencies have more communities that are having problems accessing fresh water or drinkable water?
Good question. No, climate change is a big thing for us. It's a big thing because you're talking about the water catchment areas. You're talking about aquifers getting deeper and lower, and in a way that is becoming very expensive even to drill to get to the water points. So that's one big thing which we're getting. So what's happening right now in World Vision, we have introduced to every community what we are calling community disaster management, risk management committees, and basically to look at issues of environmental conservation. Because we say that as much as we get water from the ground, but we also make sure that we get the water back into the ground. So that has been a big issue that we're doing, that is working on. Yeah, so basically, talking about scarcity of water, that's where we see the challenge. Where we used to have water, the water yield used to be high, it's getting lower and less, and so that's becoming a concern. So instead of having the first aquifer, when you look at the geological structure, there's the first aquifer, then the second aquifer, we end up going to the second one, which again contributes to the high cost of drilling boreholes.
Yes, certainly when you look at climate change, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly, if a disaster has been, something that's a, seasonal issue, or if it's something that's abnormal. And when you look at some of the effects that climate change can have, it could be freezing temperatures in one area and drought somewhere else, and monsoon floods and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, definitely, it's definitely not contained into one specific issue area, so it's definitely a huge concern.
And maybe just one more thing that we are doing as World Vision, we have introduced what you're calling farm-managed natural resource generation. So we go like Mauritania, where an area is kind of enclosed, and then it's left over years for it to regenerate. And most of it is farm-led. And so it's one of those things we are finding seem to be helping also with getting water into the aquifers of the catchment area.
Thank you. Just to go back, a lot of people I think were here on the presentation last Thursday, and one of the things that group pointed out, it was a lot of domestic agencies talking about the abundance or apparent abundance of water in Canada and how we perhaps may abuse that water here. They talked about wastage, and one of their primary focuses for reducing waste was to raise the price. So if water cost more, then we'll be more careful with it. Sort of the concept of we value what we pay for. How does this attitude and how it appears to be working in Canada's context impact water as a right, which one would presume would be free? I know you weren't here for the presentation on Thursday, but it really made me think.
Yeah. No, I thought, no, that's good. I think it's only in Canada right now, for the last 10 years, I've not been paying for my water.
I pay for my water. How did you do that?
Yeah, in a way, I'm a bit surprised, but I know some places how to pay. And I remember when I was in England some time back, they would say, how much right do we have watering our gardens and washing our cars and doing all sorts of things when somebody out there is actually looking for a drop of water? Mm-hmm. So the question was, what moral authority do we have to talk up to address issues of water rights when we ourselves in our backyard, we are not even paying attention to that? Yeah, so I think that'd be interesting, especially I'm thinking about in a developed country like and fast-paced country like Canada. I don't know whether that will deter, because I'm looking at the consumer attitude that we have here. Maybe if that's the case, then we may turn it, if you're going to turn it like a commodity, like oil commodity, maybe it may change the way people relate and handle water, maybe the way they value and see the importance of water. Maybe that may change, but I'm just not quite sure how it will look like if there's a price, maybe increased price on water. I know people still have to have water, but then I don't know whether there be some of it might be on credit system or something like that. But I think it may, in a way, change the lifestyle. People may be more cautious. I think right now people are taking water for granted because they don't feel the pinch. Nobody feels the pinch here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A bottle of water already costs more than a bottle of pop.
I go to grocery and I've been wondering, sometimes I feel like stopping people and ask, why are you always carrying water? I see people just putting those carts full of water. And then they come back next week again, filling the carts with water. And so I'm wondering, do they really use the water? Or is it for something else? So I'm here to do some research on that. I'm very curious to find. But then I saw, my take is that people would be willing still to spend, even if you take it up by $2, they still be willing to spend money on that. Because people are so, I think we are living in a generation where we are very much health conscious than before. And people know all the heavy metals that are in water. And everyone's trying to run away from that. So the question is, how safe are you when you rely on the Ontario water supply and when you have the bottled water? So again, those are some of the things which maybe might still be up there in the air, but be interesting to find out. Yeah.
Anybody else have a thought?
I have a thought. So you're saying that raising the prices on water is working?
This is what our panel showed us.
But is it working? Only because communities, like remote communities, their only store is a northern store. And to buy milk is $20. To buy anything healthy like that, like fruit or vegetables, you're going to spend more than $20. So to increase the price of water and then to send it to a northern store in a remote community, what's it going to cost for them then? $100? When these communities, they're already struggling to build new houses because they can't afford the plumbing in the new homes, and then you're going to make them pay for water there again. Like, is it working? That's my thoughts.
I think their focus was a little bit more on the industrial use of water, but I was just curious to see how that might play, and perhaps in a developing country, if industry who was making a lot of money off water was charged for water, that could be a subsidy which could then be used to fund water programs. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this area by any stretch.
Yeah, Susan, can I just throw something out there for us to think about? I don't know what is a dichotomy, because we're here in North America, we've been encouraged to live healthy, to eat healthy. But then when you look at what's been out there in the stores and in the restaurants, you find, for example, when you go to McDonald's, what do you get in McDonald's? One McDonald's is about $1 or whatever it is. But then when you want salad, it's $7. Have you ever thought of that?
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? Because they hear you expect to live healthy. They're talking about obesity is a big issue. They're looking at their stats and all that. But then when you look at the market, you can't afford to buy a salad every day. So I'm just throwing it out for us to think about, as we think about water, putting a price tag and all that.
Our world's a little bit screwed up, isn't it? We charge a lot of money for a salad, but diabetes medication is free, or close to free. Anyway, it's a little bit strange. I know students have class to go to, so we'll do a little bit of a wrap-up, and I'm sure people would like to mingle around with some of our guests a little bit later. Just a quick wrap-up. I think it was fascinating to hear from different perspectives, people who come from a different side of the same issue. But the one thing that was a commonality amongst all of your presentations and the answers to the questions is the focus and the connection between water and women. Women make up half of the population, and probably more than 80% of the development students at Humber, as you can see from the room. Yet so much of their time in their daily life is related to water, walking to get water, boiling water, in some cases to make sure it's clean, and then the activities that they engage in related to water as far as cooking and cleaning, which all require water. And I think it's really key to point out that this time's not spent on doing things like going to school, earning a salary, growing food, or helping to build the economy. So perhaps if all of us can take some time and focus on how big a role water plays in the lives of women around the world, and what defining water as a right might change for those women around the world, where if they, we've been struggling as a gender, we've won lots of rights, but perhaps the right to water would be one of the biggest things that could change the lives of girls and women around the world. Can you imagine if you walked a couple of hours every day for water, and then probably spent another couple of hours boiling it? All those hours to your life that you could spend on going to school, on getting an education, on starting a business, on teaching your children. So I just, that really resonated with me, that connection between women and water, whether that's domestically here in Canada or whether that's in remote communities around the world. I really should end with Snoop Dogg, but I can't do it. Because we're all people, right? We should all be working together. So we're going to wrap up now, and I want you to there's still food left, but take some time to talk with our panelists, and we'll see you at tomorrow's event. Thanks very much. And we have a number of handouts that we can pass around. Thank you so very much.
They're not many. I think maybe you can have them in class and...
Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
This is really interesting. I really totally it's fun to hear what people are thinking, hear where they're coming from. It's really interesting. I'm sorry.